The views and opinions expressed by the hosts do not state or reflect those of the company and its management. Furthermore, the assumptions, views, opinions, and insinuations made by the hosts or the guests do not reflect those of the show, the management, and the company.
Identify, discussed, understand. Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
Hello, good evening, Philippines.
Good evening, listeners.
Welcome back to another episode of Simply Security, recorded live today, 24th of March, 2021. I am Miles Melia, and for tonight, as you can see, we have a new face, and he will join me in our program as Eric will not be able to join us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Alan.
Hello, everyone. And we would like to thank everyone who are joining us today in Zoom, as well as those who are watching us tonight in our Black Pearl Facebook page. My name is Alan Rodriguez,
Welcome to Simply Security.
helping you streamline security easily.
Hello, Alan. How are
Hello,
you?
Miles. Oh my God, this is the first time I'll be hosting
Mhm.
the podcast or the webcast of our Simply Security.
Yes.
I'm actually very nervous tonight, but at the same time, I'm very excited for tonight.
Yes, and to our listeners and our viewers, Alan is part of our team. It just so happened that when we need a reliever host, because Eric will not be able to join us, we're very lucky that Alan stepped up. So, Alan, welcome to the show. I mean, you've been with us for the past months or weeks, doing the production tasks, but now you're in front of the camera. So welcome to Simply Security, right?
I'm very honored, ma'am, as we.
And of course, our episode tonight is also interesting as we are going to talk about security investigation and literary journalism. So,
Yes.
Alan, what are you looking forward tonight?
Actually, ma'am, as I've said previously, I'm very excited for tonight, since as someone who has a very broad or a very superficial knowledge about journalism, I actually had a question in my mind. Is it possible to combine or mix together literature and journalism? Because before I was thinking,
Mm-mm.
isn't journalism like very straightforward or very direct, that you just collate data, news, information to form news? And then
Yeah.
when I heard or read about literary journalism, I was actually quite very thinking so much about it. Like,
Yeah.
how is it possible? So, is literary journalism categorized as fiction or non-fiction? Is it like documentaries, literary, other literatures na around existing literatures? So I'm
Mhm.
really excited for this episode tonight, Miles.
Those are very nice thoughts, Alan. That's true. I think we have to ask those questions to our guest later. In my point of view, I am also curious on how to merge security investigation with literary journalism. I want to really understand that part because even though I've been in the journalism industry for the past 10 years,
Yes, it's very
um,
close to your heart now.
that's true. It's very close to my heart. However, to get the trust of your sources, especially if you're dealing with security information that are so most of the time confidential or you know um, confidential and classified.
Yes.
So I think our guest for tonight will help us how to convince the security people to tell more stories. So
True.
We are going to look forward for that. So tonight, here we are. We are excited to have an accomplished Filipino writer and journalist. She graduated in 1985 in Bachelor of Arts in Journalism in the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and became a staff reporter for the Associated Press and Reuters in Manila, covering political events that saw insurgencies, rebellion, coup d'etats in the Philippines until 1991. In those years, she also wrote and published A Journey of Scars, a personal reflection on life and love during her European sojourn, and was eventually shortlisted by the Philippine National Book Award.
She was also a freelance writer for a host of foreign and local magazines from Manila, notably The Economist. She was also able to write and publish different books like The Boys from the Barracks, Letters from Palawan, and Halan Halan.
She also wrote and edited a series of three coffee table books on diplomatic relations between the Philippines and Japan, China, and Singapore. In July 2008, she won two awards from the University of the Philippines Centennial Literary Prize for fiction, Below the Crying Mountain, a weave of love stories with a backdrop on the Muslim secessionist uprising in the 70s, and for creative nonfiction, Serena's story, The Loss of a Kingdom on the Fall of the Sulu Sultanate.
In 2019, she also has written a book published by the Ateneo de Manila University Press entitled Broken Islands. It was then cited by the National Press, Philippine Daily Inquirer, and the Manila International Book Fair. In August 2020, The Battle of Marawi has been published by the independent Pawikan Press. It is a maiden book in the genre of literary journalism and is an account of the largest and longest battle that took place in the southern Philippines between government forces and Islamist rebels. And in November of the same year, she was one of the recipients of the Glory Awards, one of the mo- one of the most outstanding alumni of the College of Mass Communication of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, in the category of literary journalism.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's our honor to welcome her in the podcast. Hello, Miss Criselda Yabes. Good
Evening.
evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening, Miss
Thank you
Chris.
for having me here. Thank you.
Yes, and so Miss Chris, let's
Yeah.
jump in.
Sig-
As we introduced you just a few minutes ago, one thing that struck me personally are the words literary journalism, and I guess this was what Alan mentioned also. So my question is, what is literary journalism, and how did you start your career as a literary journalist?
Well, I didn't start off as a literary journalist. Just like everybody else, I joined a news organization, which was the Associated Press at that time. And the first thing you do when you start a job in journalism is to do the basic things, which is straight news reporting.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was 1985. It was the height of demonstrations against the dictatorship. So almost every day, me and my colleagues, we were all out in the streets covering the demonstrations until, of course, in 1986 when the dictatorship was toppled. So that's it. You start from the doing the basics. You learn the small things first. Like when you go to a demonstration, you try to find out how many people are there. You get color. You get, try to get good quotes, the exact quotes. You try to know who's there, what the importance of the news is. And the most especially, you get the lead. The lead is the most important thing. That's what you have to keep in mind all the time. In fact, while things are unfolding right before your eyes, you start thinking, anong lead nito? What's the first paragraph of this story?
Mhm.
And I think that's actually what gives a lot of journalists, like ulcers and all the stress, because you really have to think of the best paragraph to start your story, because that's how you catch, you draw attention. That's how you get your readers to read you. Because
I can,
without that,
yeah.
without that, that's it. Your story is gone. Mm.
That's right. I can relate with the ulcer. I think it's just
Yeah.
good for me right now. But
And you
how
know what
about,
it was like
yeah,
at that time, diba? I mean, journalists are known to be drinking tons of coffee and
coffee until
smoking
now?
lots of cigarettes. And I mean, we went through that phase. I don't do that anymore, so thank goodness. But that's how it was like. Yeah.
Yeah, but the literary journalism part, because of course, when you are a journalist, you will be assigned to beats.
Yeah.
So especially if you are covering the whole Philippines, there will be there will in your career you will decide on where to really focus, right? What's with literary journalism, and how did you stumble onto this form of journalism?
Well, that's going to be quite a long answer. But anyway, to make it short, I've always wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer. And literary journalism at that time, especially in the 1960s, it was also called the new journalism. And you had, famous authors in the States at that time that you would read, like Truman Capote, Tom Wolfe. There's this other guy whose name I can't remember now. And in Manila, we have Nick Quijano. We had,
Mm.
you know, our very own Nick Quijano, right? So, well, Quijano de Manila, Nick Joaquin Quijano de Manila.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so, when I was just starting out, I didn't think anything of that, but I liked reading books about it because you were allowed to explore a lot of things. Remember, when you go out as a journalist, when you go out in the field, you write the story of what happened on just that single day, right? You come back to your office, you write down 400, 500 word news report, and that's it. The story is done. And then it's going to be another day. But the books that I was reading about new journalism, it showed how much time they spent with their sources, with their subjects, and it took them months, sometimes even years, to come up with a book about a subject matter that they were writing about. Um, I wasn't really able to do quite that, but what happened was after EDSA, you had a series of coup attempts. So from 1986, when Cory Aquino became president, until she stepped down for the first democratically held elections that we had when Ramos took over in 1992, you had a series of coup attempts. So because it was the news every single day. Like, I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. Like the minute you wake up, there's always like a rumor of a coup d'etat. You don't even have days off. Forget about your weekends. And there would really be times when you don't get any sleep at all. And thank goodness I was in my 20s at that time because really there were days when, I wouldn't sleep for like 3 days.
Hmm.
So what I did was because I was covering it regularly, I had the stories with me. I had my notes. And what I would do was because I knew there were stories that I couldn't write for a daily report,
Yeah.
I would keep that in mind and I would call my sources and meet up with them during the weekend when it was supposed to be my day off and
Wow.
spend more time with them, talk to them, try to get to know them, and sometimes even meet their families. And I took note of that. So we would have lengthy conversations. I taped them. And just before the end of that period, that 7 year period, 6 year period, I had more than enough with me. So I sat down and put the boys from the barracks together, which in a way is kind of like a form of literary journalism, but it was more of a reportage, because I was accumulating stories that I knew for 6 or 7 years and added the background that I had,
Mhm.
which was not written in the news reports that I had. So that's how it came to be.
I want to ask more, but I guess it's about Alan. It's about time for you to ask something.
Yes. Uh, Now, Miss Criselda, where did you get the let's say inspiration for the literary works you've written?
Well, I like reading novels. And I had, a list of favorite writers that I like to read. And foremost that comes to mind, and he's still my favorite, but he's passed away. He's a Polish writer, and his name is Ryszard Kapuscinski. And I really loved his books because the style was totally different from the works written by Americans. He's Polish. He was working for the Polish news agency during the time of communism, but he was allowed to travel abroad. So he went to the wars in Latin America at that time. He went to the wars in Africa. He had a really excellent books about the Shah of Iran, about Haile Selassie in Ethiopia, about uh, the, the the countries in Latin America, the soccer wars. They called it the soccer wars. And when you read his books, it's not, it goes beyond reportage. He would even put himself there just by describing what he would see. For example, if he was just like in a cafe or in a street corner, or if he was covering a demonstration, he's not going to give like a full picture of the event. You know, he's not going to say where there were 500 people, you
Yeah.
know, raising their arms and chanting. No, he would just sometimes focus on one person who could be on the stage, or one person who was among the demonstrators. And that description alone will show the intensity of the situation, of the atmosphere, which would give an even bigger picture of the political situation at that time. And I really loved it. I just adored reading him. And just before he passed away, he wrote a book about Herodotus. Well, not the book. I mean, meaning he wrote about his travels in different parts of the world while bringing the book Herodotus with him. And I thought that was really significant because if you really read the book of Herodotus, it's it's the first, you know, book of long form journalism.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and you're talking about, you know, ancient Greece and
Mm-hmm.
all the battles that took place in Greece and Rome and all those ancient civilizations. Yeah.
Yes.
So it was fun. His is excellent. You should read him. Ryszard
Okay.
Kapuscinski. Mm.
We'll take note of that.
Yes.
Definitely. And as you have mentioned, long form journalism, Ms. Chris, compared to other forms of journalism, of course, you have mentioned when you started, it was the daily grind, right?
Yes.
You will cover, and then, if I'm not mistaken, it's out of the a lot of information that you gathered, and you think I should not waste this, so I have to dig more and I have to talk more. And then you need to produce, of course, the stories every day. That's the daily grind part.
Right.
And then you mentioned the long form of journalism. But how different is literary journalism when it comes to research and process?
Uh, there's really not much. Okay, I think a lot of it goes. Okay, we're going to have to fast forward now to the Battle of Marawi. Um, uh, well, okay, I'm going to try to show you the difference between the boys from the barracks and the Battle of Marawi. The boys from the barracks, I was there every single day. I mean, I was a young journalist. I was covering the events every single day, and it was happening. You know, for 7 6 7 years, you were covering an event, a long running event for 7 years. So you accumulated really a lot of information. And like I mentioned earlier, you kept the notes and you dug, you know, more information, more details, get to know some people. With the Battle of Marawi, it was different because I wasn't doing the daily grind anymore. I was writing books. So it's not like I'm going to stay there every day to get an information. Because in a sense, I already knew the people. I already knew the officers. If not the young officers, the older officers, the senior officers who were young when I first met them.
Okay,
Remember, this is
interesting.
my generation. I mean, the senior officers in Marawi, we are from the same generation. They graduated in 1985, and I
Okay.
graduated in 1985. So there's a history there from the 1980s to the present, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and what I did was, because the war was unfolding, I went there, and quietly, secretly, you know, of course, again, one of them snuck me in, and I had more or less like a balcony view of what was happening in the main battle area, because nobody could enter the main battle area. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with the geography of
May
Marawi.
pakpak?
Well, no, the geography of Marawi kasi is
Ah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
city
yeah.
is divided by the river, right? So
Mm-mm,
you have
mm-mm,
the
mm-mm.
Agus River, and the River flows into Lake Lanao.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the northern part of the Agus River is where you have the army headquarters of the 103rd Brigade, which was the main army unit in that area. And you
Mhm.
also had the Mindanao State University, which is one of the biggest campus in that region. And the southern part became the main battle area, which was the commercial area, and which
Mhm.
was
Oh.
also the old part of the city, which used to be called Dansalan. So the war was pushed down. I mean, the actual, the first burst of gunfire happened in the northern part, but
Mhm.
the intensity of the fighting happened in the southern part
Okay.
of the river. So I was just like, you know, by the river, not in the main battle area, but by the river. So I was with a group of snipers who were there
Ah,
in different houses looking out. So whatever they could see in the main battle area, I could see it too. So I was there for a period of like 1 week or 10 days with them. And I thought I was just going to write a long article. That's it, because it was the news, it was the biggest news at that time. And what really surprised me was because I ended up writing an article that was between 3,000 to 5,000 words. That's very long, right? Because you
yep.
know that
Yeah.
news reports is just like between 500 to 800 words. An analysis would even go up to 1,500 words.
Correct.
This
Correct.
I did something which is like 3,000 to 5,000 words, and I was thinking, oh my God, who's going to read this? It's too long.
Is that a book pitch?
What? I know.
Was that a book pitch already?
No, no, I just got carried away because it was so intense. I mean, the first person I talked to was the officer who was part of the mechanized brigade, who was with the armor, who tried to go past that bridge
Oh
to
yeah. Okay.
rescue an officer who was wounded, but his armor, his APC, was hit by an RPG. So he
Oh,
kind of like panicked. He freaked out. He backed up, but he turned around and went towards the lake, not realizing
that.
that that was where the rebels were.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was trapped. And just by the kind of stories that he told me, I was like really awed and shaken in a way. And I even had to interview him the following day. And looking back, I had like 10 hours of talking to him, just getting all the single details because I realized then that this was a different kind of a battle, the
Mm-hmm.
way he was describing the enemy. So when I wrote it, I got carried away writing that, all those details that he had. And in fact, I was supposed to write it for a magazine because the problem with writing literary journalism or long form journalism in our country is that we don't really have enough outlet for that.
Platform. Correct.
You know
Mm.
that. We don't
Yeah.
have that. But I was supposed to write it for a magazine and they said yes. But in the end, they said no,
It
we're
doesn't
not
fit.
going to do it. So I was
Yeah.
really upset. And I ended up giving it to an editor friend of mine who was running a website in the States. And to my surprise, when she put it out, there were a lot of hits. And
Oh.
it really surprised me. I didn't realize that at this day and age, when people just like clickbait articles, when they just want reading like short stuff,
Mm-mm.
I didn't think that they would really go out of their way to read a story that was like 3,000, 5,000 word long. So with that, I said, maybe there's a potential for writing a book, but I still wasn't sure. So when the battle was over, again, I talked to the senior commanders who were my generation. So I said, let's just get together, let's just have lunch, and you tell me, just give me an idea of what was happening inside, because nobody knew what was happening inside. All the news that was coming out of Marawi at that time were things that were coming outside of the battle area. Nobody knew what was happening, really happening inside. What was going on in the fight between the rebels and the soldiers. So when they told me the story, I said, okay, fine, I'm gonna do it. But that meant talking to all the commanders, as many of them as possible, And I'm not just talking about the senior commanders. You also have to talk up to the commanders below them, their subordinates. So you have the battalion commanders, you have the company commanders, you have the platoon commanders. And if I had interviewed the privates and the sergeants
They have
and the
all stories to
corporals,
tell.
it would have probably taken me another 5 or 10 years. But I think what I wanted to do was to just find out how it went inside, how the maneuvering was done, what happened from the very start to the very end. And so, in terms of literary journalism, it's almost like writing a novel, basically. You have
But
the
all things are
middle
happening.
and the
It's
end.
true.
You know?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
have
yeah.
characters. You're not just going to leave your character in one place. You're going to have to show how he metamorphosed, how he developed, or was he from the beginning, and what happened to him in the end. And so I had that. And that to me was really fascinating because it meant it I was already out of the news report mode. I didn't even want to read articles in the internet. I didn't want to do that. And in fact, most of the articles that I read are those that were written in places like Iraq and Syria and all that, just to get an idea of how they were covering it there. And if there might have been a similarity with what took place there and what took place in Marawi. But the kind of Googling I did was really just the basic stuff, like when the Marawi when the Marawi battle was going on. I mean, things that you would accidentally find on Facebook. Okay, you read it. But when I was doing the actual interview, I very rarely Googled. I very rarely got news sources from the internet.
Mm-mm.
And that's
Oh,
because when I sat with them, I wanted to sit with them and talk to them like on a clean slate. I wanted to hear just their story. I didn't want that at the back of my mind I was saying, but he said this
Yeah,
somewhere,
yeah,
he
yeah.
said that
yes.
somewhere. This is
Comparison.
what I heard. I wanted it straight from that person. And if I had any doubts, that was up to me to find out, to do my own investigative work, not getting information through the internet. Um, and I prefer that. I really prefer. I didn't want to have all these preconceived notions in my head when I was talking to them. I really wanted it, um, straight from well, this is kind of like a cliche, straight from the horse's mouth. Um, and I think I preferred it that way because in one sense you kind of develop a certain trust, a certain intimacy. We There were officers I would talk to for just a short time, maybe an hour and a half. That was the shortest. And then there were also others that I could talk to for like, we would go on until almost midnight. I think the longest would be like 10 hours or 12 hours straight. It's not like cutting it, we would really start from the morning and we would finish at night. And it wasn't just talking to that. Let's say if I had talked to one officer, it wasn't just talking to him once, but it was also like talking to him again if I felt that his story was very critical or very crucial to what happened at sabbatical. Yeah, I think I'm
Now,
talking too long, but anyway, okay,
It's
your
okay.
next question.
It's okay. We learned a lot.
now, given that, ma'am, since there's a lot of going on in a day or in a moment, much in a day,
Mhm.
uh, and interviewing a lot of people or a lot of frontliners or local stakeholders in the area, can you tell us what is with security investigation that you find interesting that you have decided to merge it with your literary journalism discipline? But before you answer that question, let me cut this briefly for a short break and we'll be right back.
Okay, thanks.
Want to learn about corporate security and risk management from industry experts for free? Check our latest MidDirect Touchpoint to learn more. MidDirect Touchpoint is Black Pearl's online webinar platform where security professionals and enthusiasts discuss relevant security frameworks, strategies, and issues. To register, check our LinkedIn account for the most upcoming topic and schedule.
Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
All right, welcome back to Simple Security. And before the break, we asked Miss Criselda of her interest in security investigation as a major topics in her work. So let me repeat the question, ma'am. What is with security investigation that you really find interesting that you have decided to merge it with literary journalism or
Okay,
literary journalism discipline with the discipline?
I really I don't know how I would define security investigation, but I think for one thing, there's a lot of affinity in what I was doing, and I think that had a lot to do with my background. For example, um, I grew up in the South. I grew up in Zamboanga City, and before that, my father took us, the family, to Holo before the uprising in 1974. So even as a kid, I was used to shootings, bombings. Um, that was my childhood, and even when we moved to Zamboanga, I saw the refugees. We lived right in front of the Air Force Base. So we saw um, residents of Holo being flown in to the city. We saw a lot of air sorties. And and I think that stayed in my mind, in my psyche for a long time. And looking back now, I didn't find it strange that when I started being a reporter, I was right smack in the middle of the biggest story that's ever happened in the Philippines, which was the EDSA revolution. And then you had the series of coup attempts. Um, so again, it was normal to see that, normal for me, quote unquote, to see that kind of conflict. And even after I left the daily grind, and even when I, moved to Europe, I would get caught in that kind of situation. Like I went to the former Yugoslavia, and it was the same thing. And I just, basically stopped when I moved to another country and decided to chill a little bit. And that really took a lot out of me. So I think it's a kind of affinity that I cannot ignore, or I could not ignore. It's just been there. Like I would know when I should be afraid and when I'm not afraid. And somehow seeing conflict, even covering Mindanao, going there back and forth, was very normal for me. Um, I would know when it's dangerous and when it's not. That's hard to explain. That has a lot to do
Yeah.
with your instinct, your intuition.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not something that you read and say, okay, number one, when you go to a conflict area, you should do this, or you
Yeah,
should
yeah,
wear
yeah.
a helmet, or you should wear a vest. It, it wasn't like that for me. To
So did
me,
you ever wear a vest when you were in Marawi? Sorry, I have to cut you. Did you
in
wear a vest
Marawi,
when you were?
no. In Marawi, I did not have a vest, but somebody had to lend me a vest.
Oh,
But I
okay.
did not bring my own. But I remember years ago when we were covering the situation in Russia and in the war torn areas in the former Soviet Union. Yeah, I had to wear a vest. In Yugoslavia, no, not really. Once in a while, I had to, but it's not as if I would go to a place and be like have all my gear with me.
Mm.
It's more like, okay, so somebody has a spare vest, and so you can have it. But somebody gave me a gift once. Somebody gave me a gift, a vest, but it's
Mm.
gone now. I don't even know where it is. But it's not something that I have in my closet. I don't have that. So when I went to Marawi, it was just really purely just me and my backpack. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
Old
so
school style.
yeah, so it's really it's not that. It's to me it's a lot of it is instinct, and I just had to follow that. And the same goes with interviewing people. You would kind of know who's telling you the truth, who's telling you half the truth, who's you know beating around the bush. You would know that instinctively over the years. I mean, at some point you're going to have to get used to that. So, and that's the part that one for a journalist should sharpen
Mm-mm.
um, to get to the bottom of it. Because actually, if you think about it, I could have just sat in Manila and Googled all the news about Marawi and put them together and sat in my little apartment and
Yeah,
write
yeah.
out of it.
I think that's what they call armchair journalism.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's it. So in a way it's the adrenaline that keeps you going. Um but at the same time, I think, it reaches a point where the value of it all is the story. Like what makes this a good story? Why is this story
Mm-hmm.
important? And sometimes you just get it from even the most innocuous quote or something that somebody would just tell you out of the blue,
Mm-mm.
and you will say, okay, that's it, that's the story. um
Yeah.
yeah.
Miss Chris, okay, let's have a parallel view on the kind of interviews that you did during the coup d'etat, during the Cory Aquino's administration and the battle in Marawi. Um, do you see any difference as to the information that the army in particular is being given to you? For example, before the army was too uptight, but nowadays it's acceptable if a junior officer, or let's say even a private enlisted personnel, will tell their own story. Did you see any difference through the years?
yeah, definitely, definitely. It was really okay after the EDSA revolt. um you couldn't really talk to an officer just off the bat like that. You knew that
Exactly.
during the Marcos dictatorship, the camps were off limits to the press. I mean, you would have to get a lot of, permission, letters of permission, letters of invitation for you to be able to go in and just even to have a nice chat with an officer.
Correct. Yeah.
um, it's not as if you knock on the door and say, "Hi, can we just have a cup of coffee and have a nice chat here?" It wasn't like that at all during the Marcos years. So when EDSA happened, it was kind of like there was kind of like a floodgate,
Mm,
um, because of course at that time, the heroes of EDSA were the military because they went against Marcos. So it was open, they were open to interviews, but that was just like you only had what you call the poster boys at that time. You had class of 71, you had the Ram boys talking, and you pretty much know their story from what they were saying in the press, right?
mm-mm.
But what was more fascinating was the stories of the soldiers behind them, of soldiers who were not talking. And I think I became more curious about officers who hardly talked. And that
Really?
to me became the challenge
So,
because to me it was more of this is the officer who just wants to keep quiet and do his job, or this is the officer who probably knows a lot more. And so
Then the
the
one who's
challenge,
talking.
the challenge is trying to talk to that officer or getting to know what's really in his mind. And in the end, really, even if you know a lot of officer because of all those years that you were covering the military, at the end of the day, after all those 7 years, you realize that you can only count a few you know, that you could say had the real view, a very good view of what was happening in the armed forces. Um,
Now, yeah.
pero syempre iba na yon, right? It's
Correct.
what, 30
Miss
years
Chris?
later, everybody just talks. You can go to the camps, you can have selfies with them. Uh, go riding on the truck with them. You can go anywhere with them, and you'll be on Facebook. You'll have, you're going to be like a mini superstar, basically.
Now, Miss
um,
Chris,
so yeah,
go ahead. Now, Miss Chris, given that you like to interview or you target those military officials who hardly talks, right? So now, how do you prepare them in convincing your sources or those military that hardly talks to reveal such sensitive or very security related information?
there's no hard and fast rule there. I think it goes with how the conversation would flow. Again, like I said, you don't have like a book that says number one, ask him this. If he doesn't say this, ask him this. It's not like that at all.
It goes
I think,
natural.
yeah, it's natural, and also the kind of an affinity that you might have with that officer.
Mm.
If there's like, if you're in a way more or less on the same wavelength, if you know what you're talking about. Yeah, I think you just have to wait and see how the conversation turns, how it goes. um, and if there are those who don't want to talk, then they don't want to talk. You just can't push them.
Right.
You
Right.
can't force them. I think it's going to get worse if you force them. If they've already shown signs that they don't want to talk, then you let them be. But somehow there are others too where you develop a good conversation, you understand each other, you know where it's going, and trust is there. I think the most important thing is trust.
Yeah.
Then that's it. That's it.
Well,
It's
how do you explain to them the purpose of what you're doing? Because of course there are a lot of journalists also out there, and you're reporting to different news organizations or platforms. Now, how will this be different from all those reporters or journalists too?
well, I don't really sit down and say and explain what I'm doing.
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to give like a background. I'm not going to give them a crash course on journalism. If they ask me questions, yeah, I tell them, the difference. But basically, if I say I'm writing a book and I want to see what happened, and if you can help me, that would be great. If you can't, well, it's okay. Nice meeting you, and that's it. Um, I think I don't think it works when you really impose yourself, you know. And if they ask me questions about certain things about journalism, like why it's done in this way and why it's done, I mean, journalism has evolved over the years. So that's not just like giving them a crash course on journalism. You'd also have to give a little bit of history. I'm not going to spend like half an hour or an hour on our first meeting discussing that, you
Mhm.
know.
Go straight
Um,
to the point.
yeah,
I wanna, I
they ask,
wanna hear.
unless they ask me and say, "Are you taping?" Well, the first thing I would ask is, "Can I take this?"
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if they say no, it's a no. I'm not going to insist.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
All right.
So you kind of like come to a certain arrangement, which is what I had, which was the difference between the boys from Barracks and the Battle of Marawi. The boys from the Barracks, I actually taped them, and that's because it's a running story,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the officers I interviewed at that time were already underground. So yeah, it was okay to tape them because they had to be heard. They had to tell what
There.
was going on.
Yeah, it's
Whereas this,
aligned to their mission.
yeah, whereas this is the battle. They're still in active service. Um, it was still critical because the enemy could still use them as a target. They
Exactly.
didn't want their names out. So I had to follow that. I had to follow that rule, and it was fine. I think in the end, it worked to the advantage of what is literary journalism, I thought it was really much better having their call signs than having their full name there. Yeah, and besides, I like their call signs. So
So is it, ma'am, is it the same when you're interviewing with a non-military personnel, how, or example, a local resident or the grassroots community in there? Is it the same approach, or do you prefer other approach for that? That
well,
like it goes natural.
I think talking to people is basically the same approach.
Right.
Uh, and it depends on the circumstances, it depends on the situation that they're in. Some of them might want to be identified to, some of them might not want to, some of them might just be open, or some of them might just withdraw. And I think you take the cue from them. It's not you imposing, but it's them, it's
Leading.
them showing what they want, what they're ready to
Yes.
tell. um, and I think that's the best story of all, is for you to listen to what they have to tell, and only you can decide or can detect whether it's true, it's half true, or it's an outright lie.
Mm.
Diba? And that's the job of journalism, um, which is similar to intelligence, which is when
Correct.
you do the double checking. You do the double checking. Somebody says this, who else was there in that situation, and talk to the other people who might have been there in that situation to see if that is more or less accurate. So, so in that sense, it's similar to intelligence gathering. Yeah.
And Ms. Chris, since you interviewed a lot of, let's say, government officials, in this case, soldiers or individuals who are in the battlefield, um, how did you handle the what we call respondents trauma?
The trauma. The only time, okay, when I was doing the story, it was very clear to me that I just wanted the story that was happening within the battle area. I didn't go for what was happening in the refugee camps, in the evacuation
So
center,
focused.
the local officials. I didn't do that because those are things that you can Google and find out.
Correct.
Okay, what they said. I mean, those were the stories that were coming out of Marawi while the battle was unfolding. But the story that was happening inside, very few people knew that. So for me, it was more interesting to just concentrate on that. Um, but I did go with a family once who was, well, there was a group of women. So you had the mother and two or three of her children. And because I was also at the capital there once, and you had the military escorting families to their houses, which were still supposedly on the safe zone, but they were not allowed to go in. So I joined one family, going to their house to see what they had to do. And I mean, clearly, the minute they got out of the truck and went into their house, it was like a big shock for them because it was ransacked. There was a lot of looting going on. I think what really shocked me was that even the poor houses were looted. And I think every single house, most likely, I wouldn't be surprised in that city, had been ransacked. And I'm not just talking about houses that belong to rich people, but also to the poor ones. And to me,
Especially,
that was a shock because this family, they weren't even that wealthy. This was a middle class family, and they were very sentimental with their home because it was built by their great great grandmother. I mean, it had been there it was built during the colonial period.
mm,
Um, and just to see them going from room to room trying to get their things, things that were valuable to them, and you have like just a small window for you to get. What would you do, right? What would you do? What would you be looking for? What in your life is valuable to you in that small space of time? um, and to me, that's where I saw the shock, and also how they had to behave like robots. Parang, okay, I have
calculado.
30 minutes to do this. where's this? Where is my, I don't know, where's my money? Where's my jewelry? You just get that. And then towards the end, when it was time for them to leave because they were told, we have to go, I saw suddenly the panic where they were just picking up anything of their belongings and throwing it out the window into the truck or into the bed of the truck. So I think that one was definitely a big trauma for them. And so that to me was a microcosm of what each family had to go through, losing their house, losing their homes. Yeah. Mm.
So now, ma'am, I will be accommodating one of the questions. Now, I'll be
Sure.
reading from Sir Eric. Good
Okay.
evening, Sir Eric. Uh, First, got both of her books, Crying Mountain and Battle of Marawi. Just wanted to compliment you, your very engaging narration of both works. Now, this is the question from Sir Eric. My question is, what is the biggest realization you had after writing the Battle of Marawi?
It's the biggest realization. Wow. Um, that officers felt that they could be heroes just by being on Facebook. That's a horrible thing to say, but um, what am I saying? Uh, the definition of heroism was reduced to the influence of social media. Uh,
Mm-mm.
which wasn't the case when I was doing the boys from the barracks because there was no social media at that time, so I was free to go around and try to see what the real story was. So here it was more like when the battle was going on, and if you have a chance to put yourself out there on Facebook and you get tons of likes, that's it, you're
Or it,
made.
or it went viral.
Yes, or if it goes viral, that's
Yeah.
it, you're kind of made. But there were more stories in Marawi that was a lot more heroic than that. Um, and and again, these are stories that stayed silent, and this was the challenge for me to write about, and um, I was in a way privileged to have done that because even if it took a long time, when you talk to them, they're not just in one sitting, they're not just going to say everything outright. It takes a while. Um, so I felt privileged that I knew that I knew the story beyond Facebook
Mhm.
because there are real stories of heroism that was just not not based on the number of shares and likes.
I think it is also related to what you said earlier, that those soldiers who have more stories are those who are really not sharing outright their stories because they don't have the time, because they're really working that hard
Yes.
compared to those people who have the time to, take photos and craft their stories and post it on their own Facebook accounts.
Yeah, yeah. I'm probably being a little cruel, but that was definitely what I learned from
Mhm.
before, from then and now. Yeah.
Okay. But before our break, I have this one last question. And some of our audience tonight might have a writing background or not, but most of them have great stories to tell and experience to share. Now, Miss Chris, what do you think are the first steps that they can do to document those stories for their companies or their successors, especially concerning security?
Um, what is it, a story that they have to write that has to be published outright, or is it just a story for themselves? It
For
depends,
them, for
right?
themselves or for their company? Sometimes when we write report, it's missing a lot of elements, especially interesting stories that could be used by their successor or by the company itself.
Well, in terms of writing stories for a company, that takes training, right? It depends on what your company needs. Um, eh, that's something that you would have to develop over time and try to find out what it is that your company needs. But if it's just you writing your story or just taking down notes of what you've experienced and what you know, I think it's just as simple as buying a notebook and a nice pen and writing things down. And if you experience some kind of mental block, don't write using the laptop. Just really do it the old fashioned way, which is writing by hand. Do handwriting, get a nice notebook. And if still that doesn't work, turn on some music that you like. What I listen to is I listen to classical music because somehow classical music does something to your brain. You know, it makes it come alive. So you just write down anything that you want to write down and just don't worry first about structure or grammar or anything like that. Just for you to be able to know that you can express yourself. Pero writing reports, you really have, that takes time to develop and it depends on what you're writing. Like I would
Yeah.
not have written literary journalism if I did not had the years of experience of being a journalist, a rookie journalist, you know, writing. I still remember being so excited just having written a three paragraphs news
Start
report,
with that.
you know.
Yeah.
I still remember that. I still remember how excited I was that I'd finished it and it went out in the wires. You know, and eventually over time, you write a longer news report, 500 words, 800 words, and it gets longer. And you know what stories you want, you know who to talk to, you know where to go, you know the color. So that takes a lot of time. It's not an overnight thing.
Right.
Um, you know, like, the, there are geniuses who could do that, but I think even the best writers of the last century, I don't think they just sat down and had words coming out of them, which is why I think today people should really appreciate writers more. Most people in our country tend to think that writers just sit down and you type away and it's all there. To some extent, yes, if you're called a hack writer, but actually thinking about it, formulating a first sentence, a first paragraph, that takes time. Or even to think of just what you want to say, what story you want to convey, that takes time. And when I find, in my situation, when I find myself stuck, I have to go out for a long walk, you know. So
Mhm.
if you like sport, yeah, go walking, go biking, go swimming, and maybe these ideas will come.
Naturally.
Yeah, yeah.
Those
Mhm.
are all those are all well noted, ma'am. Uh, for me, I've been really struggling writing reports because first I get distracted, but now sige, I'll try your recommendations and suggestions in writing reports. So now let us just take another quick break, and when we return, we'll be continuing the discussion by reading some of our participants' insights and questions. Only here in Simply Security.
Streamlining security easily.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by Business Profiles Incorporated, leading the way to strategic corporate risk and security management solutions. Business Profiles Incorporated, our business is to keep you in business. Black Pearl Consultancy, bringing intelligence analysis, travel security, and business continuity support to new heights. Black Pearl Consultancy, intelligence for smarter decisions.
BP Argus Security Services Incorporated. For holistic industrial protection, BP Argus Security Services is committed to the highest standards of providing effective security manpower services. Blue Force Security Services, the security manpower of choice by many companies and organizations in the Philippines. Blue Force Security Services, delivering quality protection and service integrity to your corporate needs. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions provides comprehensive corporate inquiries and background checks for businesses and organizations. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions, delivering concise, factual, and relevant service through expertise and trust.
Silverpoint Training and Development, the knowledge and skill building arm of Business Profiles Inc., offering the latest, most practical and strategic briefings and corporate trainings in the field of business security.
Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
Welcome back to Simply Security. Tonight we have Miss Criselda Yabes in our podcast, and we'll be answering some of our participants' questions and comments. So we will start with our our friend Sir Hermy Colina.
Good evening,
Miss
Sir
Chris, his
Hermie.
good evening, Sir Hermy. His question is writing memoirs literary journalism?
Yeah, it would be called creative nonfiction.
Creative nonfiction.
Yeah, but not quite because, I mean, nonfiction in the sense that you're talking about yourself. So it would fall mostly under creative nonfiction. Literary journalism is also creative nonfiction, but it has the elements of writing a fictional novel, whereas
Okay.
writing memoirs is not quite the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
think that is clear. Alan?
uh, I think this is from Sir Hermie Colina too. So conducting a security investigation could be like doing literary journalism. What practical tips could you provide to give light to security investigation?
It depends on the kind of, it depends on what you're investigating. Like I said, there's no hard and fast rule. It really depends on the topic that you're doing, and you have to figure out what kind of information you want. You know, if you're just satisfied with just sitting down and just looking out for one single thing that you're looking for, then maybe you can achieve that with just having one interview or a few interviews.
Mhm.
But if like you're looking to write a book, as I did, it meant talking to officers. Like, I mean, when I did Battle of Marawi, I did my interviews for about 18 months, 1.5 years, and I talked to about 80 people, not just officers. Most of them were officers, but not just officers. So, and that consumed me. You know, it was my life for 1.5 years. I didn't do anything else apart from that, and the only thing that kept me sane was like going to a classical concert at UP. Uh, but that was it. You know, I didn't even date. That was my life. I was really just focused and obsessed with it, and I did it quietly. You know, it was like I the feeling that I had was that I was on a mission, and I had to do it until I knew I had the story, or I had enough with me to write a story, and that's very hard to explain.
Mhm.
Only writers would know that when you know, okay, the story is done. You know, this is it. I have it. Um, it's really purely instinct.
All right. Now from Suraida Adyong, hello, good evening. While doing Battle for of Marawi, did our speaker, Miss Chris, interviewed non-military personnel as well?
I did for the book. Majority of the people I interviewed were officers because, like
Mhm.
I said, I was more focused on what was happening in the main battle area, not outside it. But I also had to find out what was happening on the side of the rebel, and for that, the side of the rebels, and for that, I had to go to the town where the Maute group started, which was in Butig, and there I was able to talk to the people, to people who live there.
Mhm.
The evacuation sites, I talked to people who were trying to get into the main battle zone to get their things. But it was only later on, maybe towards the very end, where I was with a friend and we went to evacuation centers and we talked to people from the provincial hall. But again, when you're writing a story, it's not because you put in all your information and it's there. You get the best parts of your story to come up with the book. Yeah. Mm.
All right. Now, here's a question from Miss Krisa. Good evening, Miss Krisa. So, how do you define and set a limit from writing an expose to literary ethics? When do you say if a situation should be or should not be written?
What's the story? It should not be written when your source says you can't write that. Diba? I mean, if you have a source and your source tells you, okay, this is completely off the record, you can't.
Yeah.
Unless,
You
of
have to
course, you
respect that.
manage to get that story, unless you manage to get that story from somebody else who was willing to talk about it, then you're no longer obliged to that person alone because you were able to get that story from somebody else. Uh, I think it's that. It also depends on the situation. But I mean, you'll have to give me the circumstances. I can't just say yes or no. It's how it's done. But a lot of it has to do with uh, the relationship between the source and the reporter.
The report.
All right. Okay, maybe one last comment from Sir Hermie. He says he wrote another good story that you can write. Maybe this is a suggestion. Would be about the extent of post-traumatic stress disorder in the military, given that unlike other armed services, we do not see the trauma of war, but just dismiss it as part of being a soldier. Because Sir Hermie is also, if I'm not mistaken, he has a military background. So I guess that this is where he's coming from, correct, Sir Hermie? But Miss Chris, what's your take on this?
I think that's one of the sad things I noticed that happened after the Marawi battle because I don't think the officers had enough debriefing. And I'm not just talking about the officers, I'm also talking about the non-officers, the enlisted men. Because the officers, I, they're not going to come out and say, hey, I'm troubled.
Yeah.
They're not going to say that. You know, even men who are not officers would probably take forever to admit that they have to see psychiatric help, right? Or to talk to someone who can help them out. So what more if they're officers when you have to show your men that, hey, I'm strong, I can do this. But I think a lot of the enlisted men suffered a lot, and that's where the armed forces did not have enough support to guide them. I mean, some of them were able to get some help, but not all of them. So I think there should have been more debriefing right after the battle, because I think a lot of them really had unburdened themselves. Um, but I know there was also a professor in Davao, at Ateneo de Davao, who had done a similar report, similar study on that, on stress disorder. But she was, I think, writing from, I'm not quite sure now because I haven't read the report, but she was writing like from the overall war that was going on in Mindanao in the last few decades. So, yon. Yes, it's very important to have that. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all of your questions and comments. Unfortunately, we have to move forward to the last segment of our show, which we call Quick Talk. Alan?
Quick talk. Now, Miss Chris, quick talk is very simple. We will basically give you quick questions wherein you either choose from two options or you just give us a very short answer. Do not worry, as no explanation will be needed. This is just for fun and to end our episode on a lighter. So
Okay,
now,
wait.
Miss Chris, are you?
I have to choose two answers. Paano yun?
No, you have to select from two choices. Basically, ma'am, which is which? Which do you prefer?
Okay.
Yeah.
Which subject do I prefer?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Are
So,
you
are you
ready?
ready, ma'am?
Hey,
All
Okay.
right, let's start. Books or newspaper?
well, books, of course.
Of course, books. How about getting your information? TV or social media?
I don't have TV, or at least
None.
TV has conked out.
Yeah.
Uh, I get my news from an app. Usually, the
Ah.
only app that I have is the BBC.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
so
So
writing for a local press or writing for an international press?
Syempre, international press. I was trained by the international press. I started with Associated Press. I know the ropes. I know the standards. So I'm much more comfortable with that.
the
Yeah.
foreign press. Okay. What is the most stressful and most rewarding part of your job?
Um, it's getting the right story and and finishing the last sentence
Oh
that
yeah.
would make you feel like that's it. This is it. You know.
And I'm happy when I wake up after.
Well, actually, I was going to say something else, but I think mas-shocking audience ko. So, muna.
Oh,
Sige.
all right. Now, Miss Chris, of all the books you have written, which one is your favorite? Most favorite?
That's an unfair question, but I have to say, I have to say that when I wrote The Boys from the Barracks, it was a labor of love in the sense that nobody asked me to write it. I didn't have a publisher, and I was just doing it. So in that sense, yes. But in terms of favorite, it's hard to tell. You can't, that's like asking your children who's your favorite among your kids.
Right.
I agree. I agree. Okay, for our last question, why do you think security investigation or security related stories are important?
Recently, you won't believe this, and maybe thanks to the pandemic, I just finished watching Homeland. Did you watch that?
Yeah, yeah, on Netflix.
It's been going on for like the last 8 years, and I wasn't watching it. It's like iniisip ko at the time, oh no, another American CIA story. When I saw it, I realized it talks about not just the person who is getting the information, but the person herself or themselves. And I think that's the value of it all, because in the end, they also have to do an assessment of what they know, and whatever conclusion or ideas that they have that came out of that information that they have can make a whole lot of difference. It can change the world. And you saw that, diba? You saw that in the final series. So and from the very beginning, actually, diba?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. So I think that's crucial. It's not just what you get externally, but it's also what you have. So which means the person getting the information has to be equipped and balanced. You
To
know.
bear those
Yes. So
stories.
there's in Homeland, I saw that in this woman. She has the brilliance and also the madness, and that's the same thing.
That you have?
Uh, yeah, that's the same thing for an artist, diba? It's the same thing for an artist. When you see a painting or when you see a good book, it's a combination of brilliance and madness. And so I think it's also critical what that person has. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Miss Chris, for being so game and
Thank
for
Yeah.
this wonderful discussion. Before we end our program, Miss Chris, feel free to promote your books.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to say that starting Monday until April 9, which is the Araw ng Kagitingan. Monday was the Philippine Army Day. The book is having a sale, so if you get 2 copies, you get 10% off. If you get 3 copies or more, you get 20% off. And you can do this through the Facebook page, The Battle of Marawi.
All
Thanks.
right.
all
So
Take
right.
just,
advantage.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just telling audience take advantage of the sale.
Correct.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Miss Chris. We hope you had so much fun as much as we had tonight.
And we
Yeah,
would,
it was fun. Huh?
yeah, and we had so much fun too. I think we
Yeah,
lack wine. It's
I
we was
know. Yeah. This would have been a longer conversation, like, it really, some of the questions where you can't just give a answer. It really depends on the circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Chris. And we would like to thank also everyone who tuned in and participated in Business Profiles Incorporated and Black Pearl's security podcast, Simply Security. We hope that you enjoyed and learned something new tonight through this episode. We also wish to have you again next time. We are casting live every other Wednesday, 6:30 in the evening. You can also catch the recordings of tonight's episode starting tomorrow on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. Just type in Simply Security.
And to get the latest security information in the Philippines and for upcoming events, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and and at Black Pearl Consultancy under the Information Services and on Twitter at @BlackPearl_Inc. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Black Pearl Consultancy and give a like to our videos.
We'd also like to give special thanks to our production team and our managing director, Mr. Joseph Guetta, for making this program possible. Again, this is Miles Melia.
And on behalf of Mr. Eric Alendogan, I am Jean Allen Rodriguez,
This has been Simply Security.
helping you streamline security easily.
Good evening.
Goodbye.